it's hard to start a wrestling company, get it off the ground. So what kind of possessed you to do that in the first place?
That is a great question. It's so it's a strange story. So I came to wrestling late. I was never a fan really growing up. About 10 years ago, I went to a WrestleMania watch party, and it kind of blew my mind what I was seeing. Mm-hmm. And I started watching, and I fell in really deep, and became a huge fan. And at the same time, I was producing live comedy here in Vancouver. And so I was always talking about, well, two things. One, trying to hype up wrestling as something that people should enjoy and would enjoy to, like, my friends and family, peers, that kind of stuff. And then secretly in the back of my mind, I always wanted to kind of put on a wrestling show. And I was always kind of talking my wife's ear off about it. And I turned 40, and I knew I wanted to do something special, not to celebrate myself, but there's sort of a social contract, that's out there about certain occasions. Like, when you get invited to a wedding, you're going to go and you're going to participate. And I felt like turning 40 is an opportunity to basically force all of my friends to do something. And I was like, oh, I'd like to do something with Prince because I'm a huge Prince fan. But ultimately my wife was like, this is it. Like, you have to put on a wrestling show. And so she convinced me. Wasn't quite convinced at first because it's going to be friends and family and it's just going to be burning money. But, you only live once.
Had you put on any types of shows before?
Live comedy. So I was experienced. Gotcha. Yeah, I was experienced at, like, getting the venue, getting the license, working with the performers, which is like herding cats,
Right, of course.
And so that stuff I knew. And so but the wrestling side of things was alien. But she convinced me. And so I started, reaching out to some contacts that I had. Luckily, there was a little bit of crossover between the Vancouver wrestling scene and the Vancouver comedy scene. So I had that. But I knew that my friends and family would not really care. They would come, they would watch, but how do I get them to care about who wins and who loses the matches? And at the same time, my daughter had just been born, my first and only child. And she didn't have a middle name yet. Uh-huh. So I created this bracket, a 64 name elimination bracket, like a March Madness style bracket. And I should have started with 32, started with 64. Anybody wants to do this at home, start with 32. Don't start with 64. It takes way too long. But I started with 64 names. I did a whole live stream on my Instagram revealing of the 64 contenders for her middle name. Uh-huh. And from that point on, every day I would take a handful of my friends, throw them into a group chat, and have them sort of debate which name should go on in the bracket. And sometimes the name that went on was a shoot, and sometimes it was a work. And slowly but surely, we eliminated the names down until there was just 8. And people were on board with this name bracket. They were fighting each other in the streets, debating the mouthfeel of certain names and how they were coming out, all this sort of stuff. And when we got to the final 8 names, that's when I blasted out this video, this invitation to everyone to come down to see this wrestling show where the final name would be determined via a professional wrestling tournament. Mm-hmm. So we assigned a middle name to each wrestler, had them duke it out, and everybody that walked in there, even though they had no idea who the Rain City Stretcher Liza Hall was, but they knew that they wanted that middle name to be B-E-A. And so they were on board from the very first lockup.
But of course, you booked the matches, so you knew what the names were going to be, right?
Yeah. It's so funny how many people up to this day come up and be like, "I can't believe you just let these wrestlers, you just threw it up, and these wrestlers they fought, and you have this random middle name." I'm like, it's not like it blows my mind still to this day about that. But So what
was the final name then?
So my daughter's first name is Coco, last name is Mitchell, middle name is Harriet. Coco Harriet Mitchell.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But we had
so that was your first show, and then how did that lead to? Because I'm looking here at what the information that Brady had sent me and the stuff that I got. And you guys have a lot of shows, and they've all been sold out. So you do this first show for your 40th birthday to name your daughter, quote unquote, and then you decide, wow, that's pretty good. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I mean, even when the show was going on, the guy that we rented the ring from, a local promoter named Cobra Kai, he came up and he's like, "Just so you know, I'm never going to rent you the ring again." And I said, "Don't worry, I'm never going to put on a show again." And a couple of days later, like you get the adrenaline kind of wears off, and I ended the night by going through a table, by the way, as well. So I had,
of course,
and yeah, so it's just a rush, and then you just start chasing that dragon a little bit. In the back of my mind, I'm like, wow, that was pretty fun. That felt really close to being like professional. And we had a hot crowd. Everybody was into it. I think I could do this again. And so I made a list of things that just need to check off. Like, in order for this to happen, I need A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever, how many things there were. And slowly but surely, I began to check them all off. And I remember checking off the last box and just started sitting there in silence and realizing, like, I guess I have to buy a wrestling ring. Like,
right. And how does one do that?
It's a lot harder than.
Well, no, I'm asking for sure.
Yeah. So I thought I would be able to jump on the internet and be like, okay, there's like 20 companies. They all sell wrestling rings. There's 3 in Canada and 3 in the United States, or whatever. There aren't. There's one company in the United States in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky.
Wow.
Who has a website at least that you can purchase rings from. So I saw that and I'm like, well, there's got to be rings around. And so I cold called every wrestling promotion I could find in Western Canada, being like, do you have a ring? I would love to buy it. You must have spare rings. Half of them wouldn't even talk to me. Most of them were like, we would never sell our ring. Turns out wrestling rings are as good as gold. Like that. Right. They're just so hard to come by. Most of them are hand fabricated. It's mind blowing to me. So I just pulled the trigger. I was like, well, I guess I'm buying a wrestling ring from Lawrenceburg, Kentucky to get it up to Vancouver. That was a whole ordeal too. Like, learned so much about international shipping duties and blah, 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 blah.
How does it come? Does they ship it to you on a truck, or is it in the mail, or what?
Yeah. Well, I think all mail comes on trucks, Chris. But it shows up one day. I had to coordinate with this international shipping company, and they basically took me by the hand, and they were very patient and very kind with me, which I endlessly appreciate. I still give them anytime they want tickets for free. Like, they're members of the family. Once we have a Boom Hall of Fame, those guys at the shipping company, God, I wish I could remember what their name was. They'd be like first entry civilian division, to the Hall of Fame. But yeah, it shows up on a truck, and it was super stressful. Ordered it in May. Our first show was September 17th, and it showed up the day before the show.
Wow.
Yeah. So very stressful couple of weeks leading up to the show with no ring. So